Hello all, today I'm making a hook and ring toss game for one of my sisters using some Bocote as the main wood. If you think I'm mispronouncing the wood at any point, I probably am, so feel free to correct me. The first step, of course, is breaking down the wood into its individual parts, so that's what you see me doing here. It started out at about 5 feet long, and I need to get 4 pieces out of it. 2 pieces need to be 5.5 by 12 inches. These will be glued together and make up the base of the game. Another piece should be 4 inches by 12 inches, which will be the token board. The last piece should be 3 inches by 16, and that will be the top of the game. The starting width of this board is just under 7 inches, so in order to reduce waste, I decided to straighten a 16-inch length, then rip it at about 3 and 15/16 of an inch. This way the 4x12 and the 3x16 will be very close to their desired dimensions, and I'll have some extra Bocote at its full width later on. Once I've cut those 2 pieces to the appropriate widths, I just need to hack off 4 inches from the token board to get it down to 12 inches. Now it's time to flatten everything. I'm not going to show the entire process because half of it is just flipping the pieces over and running the router again, so it really looks exactly the same. Something I didn't realize until now, though, is that I really should be flattening both sides of the pieces that make up the base. I think I normally just flatten the mating faces and then flatten the exterior faces after the glue up. However, that runs the risk that one or both pieces look like a wedge from the side, so overall the glued up pieces will be consistent thickness, but the whole joint might not be parallel to the surfaces. There's another risk, which is that the 2 pieces won't be the same thickness as each other. With both faces flat, it's time to glue the base together. I tried to utilize some grit from 60 grit sandpaper to prevent the 2 pieces from sliding around, but that didn't work at all. I don't know if I'm using too much glue or if 60 grit isn't coarse enough or if that trick just doesn't work because it was a struggle to keep the 2 pieces where I wanted them. I would guess that I used too much glue though because there was a ton of squeeze out. I spent almost as much time cleaning up the squeeze out as I did aligning the boards and clamping them together. With careful editing though, it sort of looks like I know what I'm doing. With the base glued up, I take it over to the table saw to give it a straight edge, cut it to its final width, and then square up the ends. In order to do the next step, I need the post prepared. Because I use manzanita branches for the posts of my games, I need to use this jig to hold the post for me while I cut the ends of the miter saw. I also need to make sure that the average center line of the branch is a consistent distance from the fence of the miter saw. For that reason, I marked a center line on the jig and I keep the same side of the jig against the fence for both cuts. Keeping the same side of the jig against the fence also ensures that both ends of the branch are perfectly parallel to each other, which is critical for getting the top of the game to be parallel with the base. The last thing I'll do on the base for now is drill a hole so that I can screw the post to the base. I'll utilize wood glue as well, but the screw will provide some additional strength since the glue joint is end grain to face grain. In addition to drilling a hole straight through the board, I need to drill a larger hole on the underside to accept the head of the screw as well as the plug, which will eventually hide the screw. With that hole drilled, I temporarily attach the post to the base with double-sided tape and then drill through the base into the post, giving me a pilot hole through both materials for the screw. Now I'm drilling holes in the token board to house the token, and then I utilize the pilot hole from the Forstner bit to drill the holes that will house the magnets. Incorporating the magnets is always a problem. The problem stems from the inability to effectively sand the bottom of the hole. If the epoxy that secures the magnets isn't close to flush with the wood, then it will require a lot of hand sanding. Even after sanding though, it never really looks perfect because you just can't effectively sand the entire bottom. If I were to use a more liquid epoxy that takes a couple of days to cure, I would probably have much better results, but sanding the bottom of the hole would still be problematic. I'm not going to get into how everything went wrong or what exactly I did to screw it up, but what I will share is my plan for the next time, which I think is pretty solid. It's so solid, I'm able to sort of use it as a solution for this screw up. The plan is to drill with the Forstner bit and drill the holes for the magnets just like I did here, except in the future I won't drill the Forstner holes as deep. This way I can come back with a router after filling the magnet hole with epoxy to remove a tiny bit of material from the bottom, which will also help to clean it up and require less sanding if any. In order to utilize a router bit with a bearing, I needed to use the same Forstner bit to drill through a piece of scrap wood. This way the bearing on the bit has something to write against. This is the part of the plan that I'm utilizing to help save this token board. After starting to salvage this piece, it quickly became apparent that there will still be some sanding to do. However, it is pretty minimal and there's no tear out from the Forstner bit to worry about, so I'm going to call that good enough. In case you're wondering why I'm not plunging with the plunge router, it's because I noticed that plunging and locking gives ever so slightly different depths, causing a spot I initially plunged into to have a little more material removed, which ultimately results in more sanding. This next step is the most complex part of the build in my opinion, and that is drilling accurate holes in the top of the game and the post of the game so that the top of the game properly lines up with the bottom of the game. I've explained in detail in prior videos how I do this part, but this time I'll just say that I create and use spacers so that the center of the top of the game is in line with the center of the bottom of the game, and the two boards are parallel to each other. If you'd like more details on this, please let me know in the comments and I can let you know the timestamp of which video to watch, or maybe create a video specifically for this part in the future. The purpose of the clamp was to make an indentation on the two pieces so I know exactly where to drill each hole for a shared dowel. To actually drill the holes, I use a drill press because I have a drill press, but I think you could get away with using a guide block and a handheld drill. So I actually put this dent in the top of the top, and I had already drilled the hole in the top of the post for the dowel, and that meant I couldn't use that same trick to find the point for the top of the for the hole in the top. So I transferred the line to the other side, which worked pretty well. Oh, but then I didn't account for the fact that the mark wouldn't be in the actual center, so it was kind of in the wrong spot. To clarify, I consider the game to have a front and a back, so I orient the pieces in a way that the prettiest side of the top and the bottom are facing the front. I could have just used the first hole I made, but then the pretty side would be facing the back. And I had to drill a second hole in a different spot to make up for it. And I got really lucky because this hole, the wrong hole, is hidden by the top of the post. So that was terrifying, but it worked out. Because I couldn't use that same trick, the hole placement probably isn't perfect, but I think it's good enough that I don't need to remake the top piece of the game. So now I can move on to the next step, which is to put a chamfer on all of the pieces. I just use a simple 45-degree bit for this. The token board and the base of the game only get the chamfer on the top, while the top of the game gets the chamfer on both sides. This should be really obvious, but make sure you do this step before the glue up, because after the glue up I think your only option would be to do it by hand. The next step that I do prior to the glue up is finishing the post. I always use either a spray or wipe on polyurethane for the post and somehow never have issues with it, so that's what I'm applying here. The reason I finish the post prior to the glue up is to make sure I don't have drips or anything on the other pieces of the game. Also, if I were to have issues, correcting them after everything is glued together would be a nightmare, if not impossible. Alrighty, it's finally time to do the glue up. The first thing I do is dribble some medium thick CA glue onto the screw that holds the post and the base together. I do this because one time I didn't do it and the game would squeak a tiny bit when in use. The CA glue seems to prevent that. With the screw started in its hole in the base, I spread some wood glue on the bottom of the post. I try to use as little as possible here to prevent a bunch of squeeze out that'll need to be cleaned up later. After that, I pretty much just screw the post to the base. The alignment of the post here is pretty important though. If it's rotated enough, then the top of the game won't be perfectly centered over the base of the game, and also with all the character of the branch, there's a particular spot on the post that I want to be in the center of the board so that there's enough meat for both of the hooks to fit inside the post. That's what the blue tape is for. The blue tape on the post has a marking to indicate the center of the board, and the blue tape on the post has a marking to indicate the point I want to be lined up with the center point. Despite trying to use as little glue as possible, there's still some squeeze out that needed to be cleaned up. To do that cleanup, I mostly just use a wet paper towel. Whatever I'm unable to clean up is so minimal that it really can't be seen in the end. Gluing the top of the game to the post is a little trickier. I need to make sure that I have the top facing the right direction, and I also need to make sure that it's parallel with the base. To make sure it's parallel with the base, I reuse those spacers from earlier to make sure it rests on both of them. If it doesn't, that's a good indicator that it's spun on me a little bit. I think the last couple important things to note here are to make sure you protect the wood from the clamps and to measure the distance from the top to the base on both ends. Even though the ends of the post are perfectly parallel to each other, unevenly applying clamping pressure with the clamp could result in the top being a bit angled relative to the base. The remaining steps at this point are pretty simple. The first one here is just plugging the hole on the bottom of the base. It looks like there's another hole off to the left here, and I guess there actually is, but it's a natural void and it's on the bottom, so I didn't bother filling that one with anything. I don't remember if my handsaw here is actually a flush cutting handsaw, but it doesn't do the best job when actually butted up against wood, so I protected the wood with some masking tape there. The next simple step is to drill holes in the posts for the hooks. To make sure the hooks are parallel to the game, I utilized my drill press and the other spacer from earlier. This time the drill bit didn't make it all the way through the post, so I needed to finish the hole with my handheld drill off camera. The last step prior to applying finish is to drill holes for the eyehooks on the underside of the top of the game. I drill these holes an inch from the ends and just use my handheld drill for this. I actually almost forgot about the token of the game. For the token of these games, I pretty much always use manzanita. I didn't record the process to prepare the blank this time, but basically all I did was cut a piece of a branch in a way that avoids the pith and allows it to be turnable on the lathe. There's not a whole lot to talk about for the actual turning. I just aim for about 3.5 inches and a shape that's not a straight cylinder. Once the token is turned, I apply the finish before installing the magnet and flocking the bottom. For the finish, I'm using boiled linseed oil, which I'll talk more about in a minute. After applying the finish to the token, I realized that its color just doesn't match the game itself. It's a beautiful bright red, but it just doesn't mesh with the game. So off camera, I whipped up a new token out of black walnut and applied the finish to that. As you'll see, this token is a much better match for the game. Bocote doesn't really accept a lot of finishes, so that's why I went with tried and true boiled linseed oil to finish everything but the post. The instructions for the boiled linseed oil say to wipe it on and then wipe it off after an hour, but I think that allows too much oil to seep into the wood, so I wipe it on and almost immediately wipe it off. To make sure I get enough oil on the wood, I apply 3 coats at least a day or 2 apart. The reason I think letting the oil soak into the wood for an hour before wiping it off is a bad idea is because I did exactly that on some Bocote dominoes I made, and they leached out teeny tiny amounts of boiled linseed oil for weeks. Okay, back to the token. You can't really see it because I've got it wrapped up in a latex glove to help keep sawdust and flocking from sticking to the still uncured oil, but that's what I'm working on. Off camera, I glued a magnet into the base, and here I'm flocking it. The way I flock the base is to apply a layer of wood glue, then dust the wood glue with the flocking. Once enough flocking is on there, I'll shake up the token to make sure all of the glue is coated with flocking. After a few hours, I blast all the loose flocking off the token and apply a second coat. A few hours later, I can blast off the loose flocking and it's pretty much ready to use. I didn't record the final steps in putting the game together, but they're pretty straightforward. I thread in the hooks and the eye hooks and then carefully tie the rings to the eye hooks, and I also apply little adhesive rubber feet to the bottom of the game and the token board. I'm really happy with how the game turned out, but I think out of all the games I've made, the post for this game is my favorite. It's got a ton of that crazy character, which is one of the things I really love about manzanita. I'm not someone who's really going to ask for you to like and subscribe, but I would love to hear any positive or negative feedback you have. You probably won't hurt my feelings, so don't hesitate to leave your thoughts in the comments.